This is our first time doing distance learning, so bear with me as we enter into a PowerPoint from a distance. So, our first week of topic is talking about imperialism and getting us to the point of World War I breaking out. Okay? So, before we even get into that, been a while since we talked, about a month. What were we even talking about again? What is leading us up into this kind of conversation? Okay, so when we left off, we were talking about industrialism, right? Where we saw that primarily things were starting in Britain. They had the resources, they had new sources of power, which were that coal, the wood, allowed them to use those resources to build up factories. Um, and we're starting to see this divide between developed areas and underdeveloped nations. We see people primarily moving into cities. We're starting to see less agricultural based communities, and now we are seeing cities with larger buildings, people who are making mostly textiles, which are clothing. Okay, so you can think of clothing as textiles, cloth, and other type of home goods. They're now available to the large majority of the world. So just a way of life had changed for the cities. But then you also see other parts of the world start to get left behind a little bit because they don't have that technology. They don't have mass education like there is in the cities. So we're starting to see a divide between different parts of the world. We also see this topic of nationalism, and this is where we really left off, is what is nationalism again? It's this extreme sense of pride in one's country. And I say extreme because it's taking it to this level of beyond patriotism, right? It's taking it to this level where you are willing to die so that way your country can be the best. And, at the heart of it, if it's coming from a pure sense, this is a really good trait to have. But when you are in a competitive world, like the world was during the era of industrialism, it can lead to some major issues. So we're seeing nations respond to this new growth, this new sense of pride in a couple of different ways. On one side, you're seeing some countries increasing the voice of their people. Take, for instance, Britain and the United States, where we're starting to see workers' rights, child labor laws, mass education for the general public. Okay, so giving voice to the people, educating them, trying to raise the standard of living. But then you also have some of these other countries around the world where they're taking the power away from the people and they're giving an increased sense of voice to the leaders, right? Think about Russia, think about Germany, Japan, China. Those regions during this time were worried about letting the people have a voice. They worried that if people became educated, that the control of power wasn't coming from leaders anymore, that they would lose their authoritarianism. And so they started to tighten their grasp on the way that their country was working. And both ways had major, major impacts on the way that governments operated, the economy, what that looked like, and again, that nationalism that we're going to see play a major role in going into our topics for today. So, the first one I want to touch on is imperialism, right? So, what is imperialism? It's that domination of one country over another, and it's going to be through political means, economic means, or cultural means. Most likely all three at the same time. Okay, so take for example Britain. Obviously, they were the powerhouse during the Industrial Revolution. They went into many other places around the world, such as India, parts of Southeast Asia, areas of Africa, okay? At one point, part of the colonies here in America, or what's now America, in order to use those resources, ship them back into the cities of Britain and use them for their own gain, right? They were running out. They're running out of these resources in their own land, and so they had to turn to other places throughout the world. Um, Ignore that text from Ryan. He's just wishing me good luck because I'm nervous about doing a text or a screen record. So reasons for imperialism is not necessary, right? But during this time, it was necessary for them, or so they thought. So looking at it through those lenses of economic, political, um, why do we need to have imperialism through an economic stance? Well, you need more resources for all of the goods that you're producing at this time during the Industrial Revolution. And resources, raw materials are scarce, and eventually you're going to run out. So you have to go to other places where you can find those resources and be able to ship it back. Otherwise, your economy is going to stall. You're not going to be producing goods anymore. You're not going to be able to buy and sell, and that's going to hurt the economy and it's going to hurt the overall population. So, again, they went into other places around the world. And when you go to these other places, you find the raw materials that you need, you're going to protect those materials. So you have to protect them using military strength, political strength, treaties, right? With that, with the native lands that are there. So having strong political and military strength, that's going to also show that sense of imperialism. Interesting side of imperialism is that religion sense. A lot of times during this period, Europeans were able to justify going into these underdeveloped areas due to religion, right? A major theme of Christianity and Catholicism was that you want to go and spread God's word. You want to help save as many people as you can. And so these Europeans, primarily Christian, were sending missionaries or priests who would then go into these maybe more underdeveloped regions and convert them. And that was their goal, was converting them. And by converting them, they became a part of Western culture or European culture. And it allowed for a way for Europeans to get that foot in the door with those regions. Okay, so starting out seems like we're nice, we're here to provide you with help, but then it ends up turning that relationship sour because a lot of times those countries were taking their materials then away from them. And these native regions weren't making money off of their own raw materials. It was just taken. Okay? So take a look at this map here, right? This map is showing all of the different regions around the world that were once under the control of the British Empire. Okay, so everything that is in pink or that reddish tint, okay, so we see 13 colonies obviously were originally under the British Crown, Canada, even parts of Central America, South America, but then really we see parts of Africa here, India, Southeast Asia, Australia. Okay, those were all resources that were then going back into Britain to be made there and help the economy there. So, did everyone just lay down and let this happen? Obviously, no. People did try to resist these imperial actions. Okay, one example of that is the Salt March. This was a really big deal in India. It was led by Mohandas Gandhi, where during this time the British Empire had laws that wouldn't let Indian citizens go to the ocean side and collect natural building salt from the ocean when it would come in and build up salt that they would then use to cure meats. All of these different reasons that we need salt in our lives, right? So if Native Indians wanted to have salt, they had to buy it through the British Empire when it's just naturally building up on their shorelines. So because of this, there was outrage, there was protest, and Gandhi led this large group of people to the ocean side, breaking past British soldiers possibly being shot at, and they went down to the side of the ocean and just picked up handfuls of salt. And just by doing this, it was breaking laws, it was a protest, it was deadly. It was a deadly action for them to take on. Whereas Africa, a lot of those tribes had already been weakened by the slave trade that happened primarily in the previous century, 1700s, 1600s. And so there wasn't a lot of strength there. Remember, they were taking the strong men, they were taking children, because during the slave trade era, they were going to be worth more. And so a lot of different parts of Africa were weak. They didn't have strong men. They didn't have a lot of family ties to each other. And so there wasn't that organization that was able to happen. And they just didn't have the weaponry as well to be able to fight back against what was happening to them. European nations just inevitably were superior to all of these different parts of the world because of technology and just use of other people, their ability to go in and use other people. One of the ways that their technology was more superior to other parts of the world was the Maxim gun. And you'll see a picture of it here soon, but the Maxim gun was, think of it as one of the first types of machine guns, right? So if you go into a fight, you go into a battle, and you have people with swords on one side, and you have people with a machine gun on the other side. Obviously, one side is stronger than the other. Okay, and so as a result, we're going to see these, what we call the scramble for colonies, where these major European nations are going around the rest of the world trying to scramble and obtain these resources to help build their own countries. Okay, and this was set up originally by King Leopold II of Belgium. Not a good guy in the standing of history. You look him up and he doesn't really have a good light on him. So he primarily went into the Congo region of Africa. He had hired a man named Henry Stanley, and the job of Henry Stanley was to set up these treaties with tribes and to help people. And King Leopold had even said his mission was to, quote, carry the light that for millions of men still plunged in barbarism will be the dawn of a better era. So on the outside, it looked like he was trying to help these underdeveloped nations. He was making treaties with them, but privately, he dreamed of conquest and profit. Okay, and so because of him and his techniques of breaking down the tribes within the Congo and taking their resources, a lot of other Western European nations we're going to see start to fight one another for land in Africa. So this is the Maxim gun. Like I said, you can see how it's able to shoot off multiple rounds of bullets very quickly, hard to take apart. Okay, so obviously a lot stronger than the other technology and weaponry that was out there at this time. And to give you perspective or be able to picture him in your mind, we have here King Leopold II. He's there on our left. On the right side was an artist's depiction of his actions and Henry Stanley's actions while they were in the Congo region of Africa. So not super great. So because of all these Western European nations starting to fight each other, okay, we've got this competition happening. They set up the Berlin Conference, where they're all coming together in order to agree upon how are we going to divvy out the land around the world, right? Trying to be civil at some level. And so they hold the Berlin Conference in Berlin, Germany, right? They kind of interesting because they're talking about how to divide up Africa, but they're hosting the conference in Germany. I'll let you make your own assumptions about that. Okay, so again, they're coming together. How do we discuss about dividing up the African continent? Fun fact, no African tribe leaders were invited to this conference. Okay, so they came out of this agreement, came out of the conference with having said, if you build an established government building anywhere in Africa, then you are going to own that land. Okay, so because of this agreement, we see all of Africa partitioned off to different leaders of Europe. Okay, so now we have this entire continent of the world divided from people who don't even live there, who don't have any relationship with the people that are living there, other than the need for raw materials to help sustain their world back in Europe, because they'd already used it up. Right? So take a look at this picture. What ethnicity do you see of the people who are in attendance? Right? They're white. And we don't see anyone of African descent invited to this conference. Pretty messed up, in my opinion. So, we have to consider that, our heritage is not free of these atrocities either. Okay, we always like to think, oh, Europe, oh, this happened a long time ago, but we have to consider that our history is a part of this imperialistic idea as well, right? So a couple of examples of America dealing with imperialism is the Panama Canal. With the Panama Canal, that was a country, it's a strip of land connecting Central America, North America to South America. And during this time, if you wanted to trade goods from, say, New York to either the western part of America, North America, you would have to sail all the way around to the bottom of South America and back up. Takes a long time. Or you take a horse and buggy across the mountains, across all of the terrain, and hope to make it to the other side as well. Okay, so America had investments that would be helped by going into Panama, creating a canal which cut the trip in half. In order to get approval to start the construction on the Panama Canal, they ended up helping start a revolution in that country where the citizens went against the government. And by doing this, the US helped get new leaders in control of that country in return for that access to build the Panama Canal. Okay, so we weren't doing it to help them. We were doing it to help ourselves. Okay, obviously we also have to consider Native American lands, where we spread west with this idea of manifest destiny, going and helping the little guy, helping everyone, improving life for everyone. And we ended up taking a lot of Native American lands for use of people on the East Coast. We pushed a lot of Native Americans out of their home tribal lands. Okay, obviously not a good thing. So, getting into World War I, how does imperialism play a role in all of this? Well, it's one of those key ideas that are going to lead us into that possibility of a great war. So I'm going to show you guys this acronym, MANIA, that helps people remember some of the major causes leading up to World War I. Okay, so the M stands for military, or increased military growth. A is alliances, N is nationalism, and I is imperialism, and finally, assassination. Okay, so we're going to break these all down. How did we get to that point of getting into World War I? Okay, so starting first, military growth, right? During this time period, we're starting to get now into the 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. We're seeing the glorification of military tradition, right? Living in the old ages, remembering all the different revolutions that countries had just survived through. These stories that were passed down from generations. People lived for these stories. They glorified them. And these stories were romanticized by young men. They heard their grandfathers talk about, the battles that they had survived through. And so it became, again, this romanticized idea that younger generations held about war. They didn't think about death. They didn't think about the destruction or the fallout. Instead, they heard about these heroic ventures of the generations before them. Okay, and we're going to see a lot of countries, because they have this new industrialism, this new way to mass produce, we're starting to see larger and deadlier weapons, unlike we've ever seen in a war before, right? Like the Maxim gun. We've never had a machine gun in war before. We've never had tanks before in war. And we'll talk about the weaponry technology of war next week. But all of this, again, is leading up to that point. Okay. Secondly, the first A of mania, we have our alliances. During this time, a lot of major developed countries in Europe wanted to keep this peace. There was about 100 years of peace in Europe, and they wanted to keep this sense of peace that was going on. So by agreeing into these relationships with other major countries in Europe, they wanted to keep this peace going on. The intention of it was to discourage war, because if someone declares war on someone else, they're going to be fighting a lot more countries than what they had intended, and it puts the risk a lot more higher than it was before. So that was the intention, but in reality, it increased how deadly wars were going to get from here on out, because now it's not just a battle between one country and another country. Now it's a battle between 5 of the deadliest countries against the other 5 deadliest countries. Okay, so because of this, we see these 2 real teams that come up out of these alliances. The first is the Central Powers. This is Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary. We also have the Triple Entente, or what we know in U.S. history as the Allies, because this is the side that the United States ends up helping later on near the end of World War I, but this is made up of France, Russia, and Britain. Okay, so going back to that idea, nationalism, we see our old empires collapsing, like the Ottoman Empire. And when the Ottoman Empire collapses, we see these other new young nations trying to come in and claim rights to the lands. If they get rights to the lands, then they get their resources. They get the access to seaports. And when you have access to seaports, you are able to trade easier. When you trade easier, you make more money. Okay? So add that all on top of that main idea of nationalism, that people are increasing their willingness to die for one's country. Okay? Again, we're all setting the stage. Okay? Imperialism, back to that idea where we're seeing major nations competing with each other for these resources. So there's international tensions that are happening among nations. They're at war with each other in ideology. They're at war with each other for resources. Okay, so you already see these increased bad relationships bubbling up under the surface as people are starting to go into Africa and Asia. Okay, so I'm giving you this picture, these 2 pictures, because it's going to preface the information I'm going to give you next. And I want you to be able to picture these people and locations I'm talking about, because this is what sets off World War I. So on the left here, we have Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Okay? And on the right, we have a map showing the entire region that was underneath the empire of Austria-Hungary. Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the Archduke of Austria-Hungary. So they had a pretty big region of Europe here. Okay, so take into account this entire orange part here. Take into account Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Serbia. All 3 regions are going to be playing a role here pretty soon. All right, so that final A of mania is the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand from Austria-Hungary. Okay, so he was traveling for ceremonial stuff. He was traveling to Bosnia, okay, which is underneath the part of Austria-Hungary's empire. And while he was traveling, or getting ready to travel with his wife, they heard rumor that some of these Serbian nationalists who lived in Bosnia were going to attempt an assassination on his life. They were going to try to murder him while he was visiting in Bosnia. Okay, so the name of this Serbian nationalist group that was causing a lot of issues in Bosnia was the Black Hand. And they were a known terrorist group in the region. They were known for assassinating major political figures, holding major protests, and speaking out against Austria-Hungary, because Austria-Hungary and Serbia had a long-standing rivalry that was going on with each other. Okay, so the Black Hand vowed to take action against Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So they were warned. Ferdinand and his wife Sophia were warned of the troubles. So when they first were traveling into the capital, they followed the original route that they had planned in their car, and there were multiple attempts of assassination on their lives from sharpshooters around the area. Luckily, they were able to avoid it, but, that was their luck. Now, on the way out of the capital, whenever they were traveling, they had this agreement with their security team that they would follow an unplanned route, so that way they could avoid any setups, possible attempts on their lives. There was some kind of miscommunication for whatever reason, and Ferdinand and his wife took the originally planned route and ended up getting assassinated along the way traveling out of the capital. Okay, so they ignored the threats, ended up getting killed in their car on the way out of the city. Okay, so what happens because of this assassination? Well, Austria-Hungary sends an ultimatum to Serbia. They wanted to ask, or they demanded, asking that all hostile relationships end, and they must punish any Serbian official that was involved with the assassination, and that Austria-Hungary was going to be involved with the investigation of these Serbian officials. Now, Serbia agreed to most part, but not all parts of the demands. And because they didn't agree to all parts of what was being demanded, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia on July 28th, 1914. You can ask a lot of historians. A lot of them will tell you that they believe this is the date that World War I starts, because this is the first point of one country declaring war on another. So remember, we have these alliances going on where all of these countries have backup friends that if one person gets in a war, all of these other countries will back them up, protect them. So as a result, Russia and France back Serbia. Germany backs Austria-Hungary. Okay? Now, France was with Serbia. What Germany ends up doing, because Germany and France are not right next to each other. Okay? Belgium is right in between there. So Germany, their army forces invaded into Belgium, which was a neutral party in all of this. They weren't involved, they hadn't declared war, they were staying out of it. Germany invades Belgium in order to get to France, but it ends up setting off this chain reaction where now they're getting more developed countries from Europe involved with this squabble between Serbia and Austria-Hungary. Okay, and we see the war set in motion. It's even impossible to stop, and that's where we're stopping for this week. So next week, when we get into things, we're going to take a look at World War I. How was this war different than any other part of battle history before? What was the fallout of it? Okay, so we're going to get into all of those things. In the meantime, here's some things for you to consider. Do you think that the Great War could have been avoided? Right? Where could this have been stopped previously up to the point of people declaring war? Outside of the assassination, what are some of those major themes that led up to this possibility of war? So you have to go back to thinking about technology, the societal norms of this time period, that mindset of the people. the way that their economies were set up. Okay, so what are some of those major themes and how did that lead up to war outside of that assassination? Who do you think suffered the most from the outbreak? You can think of this on a country level. Which country was affected the most? You could think of this on a person level. Look at ethnicities that ended up going to war in this. Think about socioeconomic levels. Was it the poor that were hurt more or the rich? Do you see any parallels between that acronym mania of then and what's going on in our world today? Obviously, we're in a weird pandemic time, but in a normal setting, do you think that we see, maybe you agree with this or not, but do you think we see any of those increased military parts? Do we see any alliances that maybe the United States has? Are we friends with other countries? Are you seeing people being more and more proud of our country in ways that maybe aren't safe? Are we, as companies, going into other parts of the world and breaking down cultures in order to help feed our economy today? Okay, so some things to think about, maybe research on your own. Not asking you to turn in these questions or anything, just kind of guiding questions to keep you involved until next week. But with that being said, thank you. Do your assignments, hopefully, and as always, ask us if you have any questions along the way.